Assalamu alaikum friends, this is Dr. Khan Tosib and I welcome you all again on the Khan's blog. In the last video I gave a short lecture on introduction to fundamental rights. Today we will directly discuss the chapter of fundamental rights. Before discussing these rights one by one, we need to understand that where these fundamental rights are existing in the Constitution. I mean to say where they are in the Constitution. These fundamental rights are provided in the Part 3 of the Constitution from Article 12 to 35. This Part 3 actually of the Constitution is comprised of the articles from 12 to 35 and all the articles deal with the fundamental rights. So, before discussing these fundamental rights one by one, we need to understand one important thing, that is, if we look to the Constitution, there are 6 fundamental rights. But if you look to the Constitution, the original draft of the Constitution means that draft of the Constitution which was adopted on 26 November 1949 and implemented or enforced on 26 January 1950. That draft is called the original draft of the Constitution, or you will find somewhere written in the books original Constitution. When it's original Constitution, it means that draft. After that, there were so many amendments, and that's why that draft is called as the original Constitution. In that original Constitution, there were 7 fundamental rights. But today, you will find 6 fundamental rights. So, first of all, we need to understand where this 7th one has gone. Friends, this 7th fundamental right was called right to property, and this right to property was a fundamental right in the original draft of the Constitution. Means that draft which was enforced on 26 January 1950. But later, this fundamental right, right to property, was excluded from the list of fundamental rights by an amendment that's called 44th Amendment Act 1978. Remember it, 44th Amendment Act 1978. By this amendment, the right to property was excluded from the list of fundamental rights and it was made a legal right. And it was not deleted. Mind this thing, it was not deleted. Somewhere I have seen written it was deleted. It was not deleted. It was excluded from the list of fundamental rights by 44th Amendment Act 1978, and it was made a legal right in Article 300A of the Constitution. So it's still there, but it's not a fundamental right, it's a legal right. And now there are 6 fundamental rights after that. After the 44th Amendment Act 1978, there remain 6 fundamental rights which you will find today in the Constitution. So this was what has happened to the 7th fundamental right. And this 7th fundamental right was provided in the Article 31. So with the amendment, the Article 31 was omitted. So now, this chapter, right from Article 12 to 35, which I said is provided for the fundamental rights. So first of all, usually what we do, we go directly to the fundamental rights. That means from Article 14, very first fundamental right, right to equality, from Article 14 to 18. But today we will discuss right from the Article 12, because the Article 12 and 13 are the most important things we need to understand, we need to learn before learning or understanding the fundamental rights. Now the question is why? Because these 2 articles form the governing part, or we can say the regulatory part of the chapter of fundamental rights. So we will understand first what is Article 12 and what is Article 13. You will see everywhere written in the Constitution regarding the fundamental rights, or if you'll check the fundamental right, the very first fundamental right, that is right to equality, and the very first article of this right to equality, that's Article 14, there where it is mentioned that equality before law and equal protection of law. What does it mean? There's written, state shall not deny to any person equality before law. State shall not deny to any person equal protection of law. Yeah. Or in the other articles, you will find state shall provide this, state shall provide that, state shall do this, state shall do that. So first of all, we need to understand what does the state mean, because it is the state which has to provide you the fundamental right. It's the state which has to protect your fundamental rights, and it is the state which has to deal with everything regarding the fundamental rights. So first of all, we need to understand what does the state mean so far the fundamental rights are concerned. That's why there is Article 12. And what is Article 12? Article 12 defines the state so far the fundamental rights are concerned. Means what does the state mean? Means Article 12 gives the definition of the state regarding the fundamental rights. So what's Article 12? Article 12 says that state includes, state means regarding the fundamental rights, state means the Parliament of India, the Union Parliament and the Government of India. Means the legislature and the executive organs of the Union government, central government. This is called a state. Number 2, the legislative and the executive organ of the state government, means the state legislative assembly or the executive organ of the government. This also is included in the Part 12, means the state so far the fundamental rights are concerned. And third point, the state also means the local authorities, local bodies like municipalities, panchayats, district boards. And one more important thing, Supreme Court has ruled that if a private organization is working as an instrument of the state, that also comes under the power of Article 12. Means this is the definition of the state. The legislative and executive organ of the central government, the legislative and executive organ of the state government, the local authorities like municipalities, panchayats, district boards, and the organization, a private organization which is working as the instrument of government also comes under the purview of this Article 12, the definition of the state. And it is the actions of these organizations which can be challenged in the court if these actions are against the fundamental rights, against any provision of the fundamental rights. On that very basis, their actions can be challenged in the court, either in the High Court or in the Supreme Court, and court will decide accordingly whether their actions are against or not. And if their actions are found against the fundamental rights or against any provisions of the fundamental rights, their actions can be declared void and unconstitutional. Now there is Article 13. What does Article 13 says? Article 13 gives the definition of law, because Article 13 says that any law which is inconsistent with the fundamental rights, or any law which is inconsistent with any of the provisions of fundamental rights. In simple language, if a law enacted or passed by the Parliament is against the provisions of fundamental right, against the provisions of any fundamental right, can be declared null and void by the judiciary. Means if a law passed by the state legislature or union legislature, if it is against the fundamental rights or against the provisions of the fundamental rights, this law can be challenged by the courts, and court will decide if this law is against the fundamental right. Court can declare it null and void, or we can say court can declare these laws unconstitutional. Now, what does the law? Which law can be challenged, or which law can be against the fundamental rights? What is that law? So, there are two types of laws. First, we call the permanent laws, and second, we call them temporary laws. First, we need to understand this thing. What is permanent law? Permanent law is that law which is passed and enacted by the Parliament, or passed or enacted by a state legislature. These are called permanent laws. Number two, temporary laws. What are temporary laws? Temporary laws are ordinances by the President of India or ordinance by the Governor of a state. Because when ordinances are issued, if Parliament is not in the session and a situation arises, at that time we need a law, Parliament is not in the session, at that time President issues an ordinance. So that ordinance becomes a temporary law, and that ordinance has to be approved by the Parliament if that ordinance has to be converted into a permanent law. For example, if President issues an ordinance, Parliament is not in the session, a situation arises which demands a law, and President issues an ordinance for that very purpose. After that, when Parliament reassembles, when the session of the Parliament starts, Parliament has to approve this law within the first 6 weeks of its reassembly, so that it becomes a permanent law. And if Parliament finds that we now don't need this law, at that time this law can end up. Otherwise, if Parliament feels that this law has to be convert into a permanent law, then it needs their approval, that too within the first 6 weeks of the reassembly. And same is the case in the states. If governor issues an ordinance, that also has to be approved by the state legislature if converted into permanent law. And if not, then it's okay, that will end up. But these, we have to understand, these are the laws. And third thing, one more thing is that there are laws by delegated legislation. Important thing. What is laws by delegated legislation? You might have heard by bylaws, orders, regulations, notifications. These are the orders, notifications, bylaws. These are issued by the executive wings, and this also comes under the purview of this Article 13, the law. So if these laws, either by the Parliament of India or by the state legislature, means the permanent laws, or temporary laws, means the ordinance by the president or ordinance by the governor, or the executive orders, notifications, bylaws, regulations, if these are violating or against any provision of the fundamental rights, their credibility can be challenged in the courts, and court can declare them null and void if found against the Constitution, if found against any of the provisions of the Constitution. This is Article 12 and this is Article 13, which are the most important things we need to understand before understanding or learning the fundamental rights, because these form the base of fundamental rights. Then it comes Article 14, means then now we start the fundamental rights. And then it's the first fundamental right in the chapter of fundamental rights, it is the right to equality. Very first fundamental right. So the right to equality is from Article 14 to Article 18. It's a very first article of the right to equality, that's Article 14. It says equality before law and equal protection of law. The two same looking terms but are different. So equality before law and equal protection of law. Equality before law is actually a British concept, and equal protection of law is a US concept, American concept. So actually purpose of these both two terms, means equality before law and equal protection of law, is to establish rule of law. The main purpose behind this article is to establish rule of law. And the rule of law itself is a British concept. Actually, it was concept given by A.V. Dicey, a British jurist. He gave this concept of rule of law. And the very first article, that's 14 article in the right to equality, says equality before law and equal protection of law.